think the whole career was just sorry, what? Are you sure? Okay, I guess.
This is Jackie of All Trades, a podcast that explores the multi-creative identity and the rise of the portfolio career among millennials and Gen Z in the creative industries. I'm Keturah, a DJ, creative, strategist, CEO, and self-described Jackie of All Trades with a 10-year portfolio career spanning music, digital marketing, and cultural strategy. On this podcast, I speak to people who have also designed their own careers and are successfully juggling multiple creative pursuits to understand what it takes, what they've learned, and how you can do the same. This season, I'm joined by writer, content creator, podcaster, and author Tolly T, DJ, radio broadcaster, TV presenter, A&R, and music label owner Jam Supernova, journalist, writer, strategist, and director Natty Kasambala, and DJ, writer, artist manager, music label owner, and cultural curator Elijah. This episode is all about Natty Kasambala. You may know her for her writing with gal-dem and her work with record labels like Columbia and Sony. Now she works as the music editor at large for Dazed and as a music video director as well. I first met Natty while she was working at Columbia, and I was there as the consultant leading the social media campaign to launch the artist Coffee. Cannot wait for you to hear Natty's story.
Hi, I'm Natty Kasambala. I am a writer, editor, director, strategist, and broadcaster. I think that's the lot.
So I want to go back to the beginning. Tell me about the start of your journey that has now progressed into a portfolio career for you. Passions, hobbies, work experience, where did it all start?
Yeah, I think I never really knew what I wanted to do at all, which probably tracks considering I still don't really know what I do. But I was always just really interested in like music, film, and just like arts and culture really. And then I went to university to do a degree that shows that you don't know what to do, which was philosophy. And I just was like, I just know I want to be in London, and like philosophy was pretty interesting to me, even though I'd never really studied it. And I guess like that was served as like the backdrop to kind of get into arts and culture and like going to loads of shows and just like meeting new people. And the first place I ever kind of wrote for was gal-dem, which I say every time I do any kind of interview, I'm just like, shout out gal-dem.
Shout out gal-dem.
They made me. But I think I literally found them on Facebook and I was just like, this is really cool. And they were kind of still based in Bristol, like tiny organisation. And I like sent them a message on Facebook like, keep doing you girls, like this is amazing. And Liv, who was the founder, like just got back to me on email and was like, oh, would you like to write for us? And like I'd always kind of been like, maybe I'll be a writer, like maybe I'll go into like the BBC or something, like do something serious or politics. And my parents had always said, you know, you always say you want to be a writer, but you've never written anything. So I'd written like one blog post that I then sent to Liv, and I was like, this is the piece I wrote when Prince died, and I was really emotional about it. Like, this is my only sample. I didn't even know it was a sample at the time. It was just like on WordPress. And she was like, yeah, perfect. I'll hook you up with Antonia, who's a music editor. And then I wrote a couple of pieces for them while I was still studying, which then led me to, I guess I was like, well, this is the only real path I have. And I just applied to loads of internships across like TV, like journalism, everything, because I still didn't know what I wanted to do.
Okay.
And then I got one unpaid at Dazed for like as soon as I graduated. And so I like quit my job to work full-time there, unpaid. And I was there for a month, kind of transcribing stuff and pitching stories and doing a bit of writing. I think after that, I kind of realised, like, as much as I loved writing, I just knew that I didn't want to be a full-time writer in that capacity and like in a newsroom or like in that situation. But I like had like successful articles, whatever, and I still enjoyed it. Off the back of that, I then went straight into an internship at Sony Music. It was the thing of like, I had applied to all these internships in January at like The Guardian, BBC, Sony. Sony was the only one I got a call back for.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the only one I got an interview for. And then I just got it.
Right.
And
Nice.
even with Sony, it was like completely general. And then it was just like, they kind of assigned you like a label and like a different department and all of that stuff. I just kind of ended up in Columbia marketing without really knowing what marketing was, at a label that was like a massive major, and I'd always seen myself as like this niche, like indie kid. And then I thought I would stay there for a year, and then I stayed there for like 4.
Okay. I think that's how we met.
Yeah,
You were at Columbia,
Columbia.
and I was working on the coffee campaign.
Yeah. So I was just in the marketing team there, and then I would kind of slowly try to keep my writing up as I was going. And then slowly but surely, like, I built a bit more of a, like, portfolio. Mm-hmm. And then eventually it just got to the point where I knew that I enjoyed writing as much as I enjoyed what I was doing at Columbia.
Okay.
And the way that the way that it was set up.
The way the thing was set up.
The way that everything was set up, I wasn't really able to kind of give them equal weight and still, like, have a life and be, like, a healthy person, because I was working more than full time, going to, like, multiple gigs a week, and then writing every evening, writing all weekend, and, like, it was just, like, a bit unsustainable. But I kind of had seen this, like, gap in the market for, like, something that was a bit more, I guess, like, a more holistic approach, or, like, a strategy type approach within the label that was, like, focusing on, like, artists that we're pitching for, and kind of, like, wider strategy and, like, cultural marketing and that sort of stuff. And that, I went into that role that we kind of created for me, and I went into that role at 4 days a week, which gave me 1 day a week to write, which I did for, like, a year. And then we entered the pandemic. And it was just hard because it was like we hadn't fully, like, cemented it before we were all working from home, and, like, kind of doing it when you can't leave the house, and, like, there's no real physical stuff going on. I think writing started to take over more and more of my time, to the point where I just realised that, like, I wanted something that gave me a bit more freedom to do both.
Okay.
And that's when I quit. Yeah. And then, I know, I feel like I'm literally telling my actual life story.
The journey.
Yeah, that's the point. And then from there, I kind of, like, what was happening with the artist positioning stuff was really good, but it just, I think, where I was doing it just didn't feel quite right. And so in the end, someone from the central Sony team had, like, spoken to me and said, you know, like, what you're doing in terms of, like, these documents that you're creating is really good. We'd like to, like, implement that on a wider Sony level. Okay. So if you'd like to come work with us instead, you can do the same thing, but for, like, across Sony.
Right.
And, like, 3 days a week. So,
just sounds very attractive, isn't it?
Yeah. It was, like, with people who I'd worked with across, like, Insights and kind of sitting within the 4th floor creative team, which meant that you kind of get to work with smaller labels who have a bit more, have a smaller roster, and just, like, figuring out all of their developing talent. So I did that for another year as I kind of kept writing, and the profile was kind of going up alongside that. And then we kind of went back into the office, and that was nice to be back in, like, a social situation, even part-time. And then halfway through that, I was approached by Dazed to become the music editor at large. And then that kind of took me back to full-time, and it was a bit much. So I was kind of, like, muddling through, like, music editor at large there, and then, like, strategy, and then still trying to do freelance writing and, like, all of these other things. And it became quite a lot, and I kind of had to realise, like, you actually can't do everything all at once, which I'm sure we'll get onto. And so I left that position after a year at Sony to go to Dazed. And that takes us to, like, January this year.
Just going back to you as a writer, so you were writing for gal-dem. How did you navigate that in terms of, like, developing? Because you went from writing one piece on Prince, which sounded, like, very emotionally driven, very, like, you know, something that you need to get out of your system.
To a diary entry.
Diary entry. To developing, to getting commissioned for more pieces, because it sounds like all the work experience was focused on a lot of, like, production skills and, like, generally just kind of, like, understanding different sides of the industry. But how were you able to develop as a writer throughout?
Yeah, I think that's probably, like, the strangest part. Like, there wasn't really any, like, development other than just doing it.
Okay.
Like, I've never had a mentor. I've never had, like, lessons in how to write. I've never, like, really learned from that side. I don't have journalism qualifications, any of that sort of stuff. So it's very much just a process of, like, little by little kind of building up. Okay. Like, the first thing I ever did that wasn't gal-dem, I think, was, like, a Crack magazine review. And I just remember just being like, why are you asking me? Like, oh, review this Kehlani album. I'm like, what? And then it goes into print, and then it's like, Crack Review have given Kehlani this amount of stars, and they think this. And it was such a trip that, like, going from literally just being a person who had opinions about music, you could just enter and be like, this is what I think, and some magazine is giving you, like, not giving you money to do that, but just also, like, allowing you to attach that to their name. So that was always really scary. And I just had to, like, kind of read a lot of other reviews and see what kind of things they were looking for and how they spoke about stuff and what the kind of tone was like. And then just also just trust your gut. And then when I started to get further into, I guess, like long form stuff and interviews, again, the same thing of just like, what? You want me to go and sit in a room and talk to Megan Thee Stallion? Like I think Megan was like one of the first proper artist interviews I did.
This, yeah.
And I'm just like, it's just bizarre. Like, you know, and you're like, I just made these questions up and now I'm asking you them. And then afterwards I'll have to do what I can with that.
Is that a different skill set from writing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a few things at play, I think, when it comes to profile writing, especially like a portion of it is like research, like pure research, knowing exactly what you want to go in with and knowing what, like the background and knowing how to like not just ask the same questions and get the exact same things back. Another portion of it is like being a people charmer, like going in and being the therapist and actually getting someone to like disarm themselves, which I think is the most forgotten part, or the reason that like it's like the differentiating aspect of like a good profile and like
the memorable ones versus
because you're able to get something that isn't just like the media train answer or like just the kind of the obvious ones or the automatic ones. And then there's the kind of like piecing that together into something that is interesting and like telling that story and writing it. So it's a lot of different.
So again, at that point, having not had done that before, where did that? Did it feel like it was a natural progression from
what I was doing?
Yeah,
already.
but like to have the confidence, like Megan Thee Stallion ain't some like up and come. Like, this is not some rapper from around the corner. Like, what made you like? Yeah, I can do this. Megan Thee Stallion, of course I do. Or I don't know, was that what you were thinking?
That was definitely not what I was thinking. I think I was just like, sorry, what? Are you sure? I think the whole career was just like, sorry, what? Are you sure? Okay, I guess. And then when someone would come back, you're like, I guess it wasn't awful, so I might as well keep doing it. And I think the lucky thing about music is that you have that thing of like, I'd love to chat to Megan. So if this is the way that I get to chat to Megan, then we gotta just do what we have to do. Yeah. So there's like that kind of payoff that kind of motivates you to, even when you're so scared or whatever, there's like a benefit and like it's a kind of life experience separately. But I say it like once every 3 months on Twitter. Like if you told 15-year-old me that I would speak to strangers, and not just strangers, but like famous strangers for a living, I would have laughed you out of the room. I had to go to theatre school because I was so antisocial and like scared of people as a kid. Like my parents were scared I would never have mates because I was just like, I liked my parents and I liked my comfort, and I've always been quite socially anxious. And I think part of that made it harder to kind of get into that confidence of it. Okay. But the other part makes you a little bit more empathetic.
Right, okay.
Because I think like something that people often forget when you're, you know, like in that position is you walk into a room and you know all of these things about this person and you are like ready with your questions and you might be like the 10th interview they've done today. They've not even been told your name, where you're from, any of your agenda. And you go in and you're like, so when your mother died, like, will you share all of this information? So you're like, when your mum died, will you share all this personal stuff and will you spill your guts to me, this stranger who's like kind of mining you for content? And I think being able to like understand like how humans actually want to be approached or like their apprehensions they might have and all of that stuff kind of plays into how you can not manipulate a situation, because it's not that, but it's like just be understanding and like do the normal basic things that you would do if you were having a conversation with a stranger.
So just circling back again to the other things that you do. So we've kind of established like your writing career is moving. You've got that strategist role that you're doing with 4th Floor at Sony. Where does broadcasting and directing come into it?
Broadcasting kind of came around when I was first starting at Dazed. I wrote an article about a Childish Gambino video, which the internet doesn't love very much anymore, but at the time it was blowing up.
This America?
Yeah, back in the day. And I, for some reason, like Radio 4 were like, oh, would you like to come on and like talk about it? Because it was just like the thing of the moment. And that was like the first time I came.
You already have, because Radio 4 is quite a different world from, you know, the black and urban world. Like where did that connection come from?
It's the video. The video was the phenomenon. And like, I guess the video went viral. The article I wrote in response also went viral, which was just breaking down some of the references in the video. It's still to this day one of Dazed's most top performing articles.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, they were just looking for someone to come on and give a kind of like cultural opinion on it.
Sure.
And I was like 20 at the time or something, or like 21. And that was the first time I think I had gone on like national radio. I had also been doing a gal-dem radio show on Represent, but that was like very much just us vibing and like playing songs that we liked. And then after that, it kind of led to a little bit of a snowball, and I think I did like a video piece for them on the video as well. And then I was invited back to do a couple of reviews. I reviewed like a Spike Lee film that came out. So that was kind of like how I got into a little bit of like, I guess, just a more serious type of broadcasting.
So reviewing in a broadcasting sense versus like written, like what is that a different skill set again?
Yeah, oh my God, yeah. And I think like I'd never listen back to my appearances because I think
really?
It's just different, like having a conversation live versus being able to like play with your words and like edit structure and just like have time is so different. Like you get to the end of it and they're like, thank you so much. And you're like, what did I say? I literally blacked out. And then you listen back, you're like, what is she talking about? What is she actually talking about? It's so different, and I respect it so much. The way that people can fit so much into what would be the equivalent of like one paragraph of what you get when you're writing. And they make it sound natural, and they can, you know, do all of that. The thing I loved about it, though, is how little you're agonising over it as well. Because you get to and then you walk out of the studio and you're finished. Like, there's no edits, there's no rounds, there's no, like, Google Doc comments that you have to go back and reject or accept. Like, it's done. And I think the next thing I did was I took over for Liv on the gal-dem podcast. I had a radio show after Represent. We kind of ended the gal-dem show. And then I moved to Foundation to do a kind of like music and culture show for a bit. Again, it was that thing of like, I just like the immediacy of radio and just having a chat and playing good music. And then I think based off of that kind of experience of like just speaking and hosting, Liv left the gal-dem podcast and she asked me to take over her place. And then I've been doing that from, I think it's like, this is the second year. And then I think off the back of that, I was approached for a Selfridges podcast, which we do, which is which is just like culture, different cultural stuff. The first season was like just talking to different cultural like producers, like artists, dancers, those kind of people. And then the second season was about wellness. And then the third season was about the environment. So yeah, just doing a couple bits of podcasts because I just think it's like such a nice and pure way to converse with people and like connect with people. That's just like, you sit there, you have an amazing conversation, and then that's all the work I actually have to do. Someone goes and edits it, makes it sound great, but like just being able to do that part of like the profiling work where it's just this like isolated moment of like having a nice chat and like talking about stuff.
You spoke about having social anxiety. How have you got from the point of not wanting to speak to anybody outside of your family to having conversations with strangers about multiple topics, things that you might not ever be necessarily that well versed on? Like how, like what's been the, I don't know, like the mental or emotional journey, like, or how have you, the progression to get to that point where you're super comfortable doing that?
It's mad. Like I think to a certain degree, like it never really goes away. Like I still get nervous every time I do an interview. Like every time I get nervous leaving the house every day. But like, I think to be honest, even theatre school that I said I was forced to go to when I was a kid, it was like, I think it was very valuable in teaching like just ways to, even when you're nervous, like how do you push through that? How are you able to still like string a sentence together, not be like, yeah. And now the problem is I over-caffeinate myself and then I talk too fast. But like, I think it's just taught me ways that like, even when I'm pranging, like you can just get through it. And often like, when you're selective enough in terms of what you do, like the interest will override the kind of the nerves. Like if I'm interested enough in having a conversation, like I will try to be present in that moment rather than thinking about like how I'm moving my hands or like how I'm moving my mouth and stuff. But it's definitely like a constant journey of just like breathing techniques and like coping mechanisms, cracking jokes, like focusing more on them, like probably not looking at them. I think I've looked at you like 3 times this whole interview. Like it's a ton of stuff and it's a lot of practice, but Yeah, it is hard. It is hard. It's strange.
I mean, you're doing it. It's happening. Yeah. It's working.
Just about.
I love how brutally honest Natty was about her career, from navigating being at a major label and in that corporate world to still writing independently for publications and doing what she loves. In the next episode, we'll be speaking to all of our guests and we'll talk about the role of technology and the internet, career-defining moments, what connects the dots between all of their creative pursuits, and the implications when one of your creative pursuits makes more or less money than the others. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at J.O.A.T Podcast UK for extra content. And if you ever want to switch it up, you can always listen to these episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.